Hi there guys, before we get started on today's video, I do very briefly want to mention that on Saturday the 30th of September, Pete's Airgun Farm are going to be hosting a little boot sale. The boot sale is going to be airgun related stuff only, and generally speaking it's a really nice little event. There's always plenty to buy if you're looking to buy something, and there's always plenty of buyers if you're looking to sell something. Now there's plenty of information on the little leaflet here, so you can have a read of that. If you need more information, however, you can always give Tony G a ring at the number below, or you can visit the Pete's Airgun Farm Facebook page, and that will give you a little more information. We are going to be showing up with a little stall. We'll be bringing a few of the things we normally sell on eBay, but with that all said and done, we'll start on the video. Alright guys, got a video here for you today on the FX Panthera, and in this one what we're going to be doing is trying to stiffen up this front rail here. So what I've noticed with the rifle is if you take a hands-off approach to shooting it, you can get some real nice tight little groups. As soon as you start interacting with the rifle and getting your body behind it, those groups open up slightly and we do experience some point of impact issues. I've taken a good look over the rifle and there are a couple areas I think we can improve on. The first is this front rail section here. What I've noticed is that with the bipod deployed and the rifle set up on the bench, when shooting the rifle you can actually twist this front rail quite substantially without actually noticing. Now this shouldn't affect point of impact as the shroud has no interference with this front rail, but it seems to affect point of impact nonetheless. What we're going to be doing is fitting a piece of steel, so this is a piece of ground flat steel. It's the right thickness, so it should fit in the front rail like so, and provide a good amount of reinforcement to the front rail to hopefully stop it twisting. With that all said, let's get you over to the mill and we'll start work. And here we are all set up over at the mill. So the material eyeball was about 500mm long, so to begin with we put it in our bandsaw and just cut it down to about 340mm long. With that done, we then moved it over to the mill and we're just squaring up one of the ends now. This end will be the back end, so the end closest to the action, and for it to fit nicely in the front rail it does need a small notch milled in the end of it. So we milled the end nice and flat using a nice sharp end mill, then started work on the notch. The notch itself is 5mm wide and about 6.5mm deep, and we're milling it out in 1mm steps. Just taking our time nice and slowly getting down to the required depth, and then once we're almost there we can take a finish pass on both the end and the side of the material. With that done we can flip the piece around and start work on the other end. So we need to mill this down to the correct length, and as I said earlier we cut it down to roughly 340mm, and after a little bit of measuring I calculated that we needed to take another 3mm off the end to bring it to the correct length. And once the piece is cut to length we can start work on the holes. So we need to drill a number of holes throughout the piece in order to secure it to the front rail. Before we can drill the holes though, we do need to find the material in the vise. To do that we're just using an edge finder to locate on each side of the vise, and then we can use our DRO to find the centre of the piece of material. Once that's been done we can work our way over to the other end and then find the very edge of the work. With our work located in the vise, the next thing we can do is start centre drilling the holes. I have gone through with a black marker pen and my scribe and just marked the rough locations of the holes, just so we can use that as a reference as we drill the holes. Now the workpiece itself is fairly long, so we are using a machine jack at either end just to stop the material from flexing when we go through with our drill bit and drill the holes. If we didn't have the support at either end, as soon as we started drilling the hole we'd run into problems, as the pressure from the tool would deflect the material. So just a little bit of support stops that. Once we've got all the holes centre drilled we can come through with a 4.5mm drill bit and get all the holes drilled through. This is going to be clearance for M4. The 4.5mm drill bit allows us to use an M4 counter bore so we can get the heads of the screws buried below the workpiece. This will just stop the screw heads interfering with the shroud or anything like that. And then as you can see there, the counter bore has a little pilot on the front of it and then acts like an end mill drilling out the top of the material using the centerpiece as a pilot. With that done, the next thing to do was to test fit the rail onto the rifle and then mark out the bolt holes for the securing screws of the pick rail. We're going to be screwing the pick rail directly to the steel reinforcing plate, and I just wanted to make sure that the holes were going to line up before we actually drilled them. But as you can see there, I've got my scribe marks and we're using a centre drill just to centre the holes. Then coming through with a 3.4mm drill bit, drilling out the holes ready for an M4 tab. The next thing we have to do is modify the pick rail slightly to suit the holes that we drilled in the steel reinforcing plate. I've already found the work using our edge finder, and we're drilling the holes now. To begin with, we're using an 8mm end mill just to counterbore the holes. We can't use a drill bit in this application as the Picatinny rail has a number of ribs through it, and these ribs would throw off a standard drill bit. So we're using an end mill to create a flat bottomed hole in which we can use a standard drill bit just to drill straight through. This will also bury the heads of the screws below the workpiece so that we can use the entire Picatinny rail when we clamp a bipod onto it. With that all done, that's the piece complete. What we'll do now is take you back over to the bench and we'll get it fitted to the rifle. And here we have the finished piece, so I'll get you a quick look at it before we get it installed into the rifle. So as you can see there, just a nice flat piece of steel with a number of holes drilled and counterbored into it. Couple threaded ones at the front here to match the ones in the Picatinny rail. We did obviously have to modify the Picatinny rail to have an extra 2 couple holes in it. They will go through the front there and clamp onto the front rail so that our bipod is directly secured to our steel reinforcing plate here. To fit the piece to the rifle, we do unfortunately have to degas it, but we'll walk through the process nice and quickly. First thing we'll do is remove the bottle. With that done, the air reservoir of the gun is empty, but if we take a look at the red gauge, you can see that the red gauge is still reading pressure, so we need to get rid of that by firing the rifle in a nice safe direction. And there we have it. If we take another look at the gauge, we can see that's now reading 0. So we can remove the barrel and take off the shroud. First thing we'll do is unscrew the shroud, then nice and carefully slide it off the barrel. Next up, we'll loosen the barrel clamp screws, and we can do that on this side of the rifle, loosening these 2 screws here using a 2.5mm Allen key. Once those are loose, we can remove the 2 barrel securing scrub screws, so one on this side and one on the other side, and they're again removed with a 2.5mm Allen key. We don't need to take these all the way out, just a few turns will do us. And with those removed, we can gently remove the barrel. This one does look a little different from the standard one, as this one is our replacement barrel, so this is a solid HFT 500 barrel from an Air Arms. It's a little different from the standard one, as this piece at the end here had to be machined directly onto the barrel. With the barrel removed, we can now fit the reinforcing plate. So first thing we're going to do is make sure that the plate is nice and clean, then get that slid in through the front. Next we're going to take a look from the top there and just line up the holes so that the bolt holes are lined up with the threaded holes in the bottom or the front rail, I should say. Then we can install our 4 securing screws. Getting them all started first before we do any one up tight, and then finally we can install our little Picatinny rail at the front here. Before we do all the bolts up nice and tight, we are just going to make sure that the rail itself is centralised. I do have a number of purple M-lock holders, or purple M-lock blanks I should say, in the side, which hold it nice and central, so that's not a problem there. We are going to just make sure that the Picatinny looks nice and straight. And then once we're happy, we can just do the bolts up using a 3mm Allen key. The 2 bolts here, so the 2 on the ends secure the Picatinny rail to the bottom rail, then the 2 in the middle secure the Picatinny rail into the reinforcing plate. You will notice that on the back here, we are missing the 2 front screws, and that's just simply because the Picatinny rail ones fit into the rail at the front here, so it's not possible to fit all 4 screws. With that done, it's just a case of reinstalling the barrel. And then if we take a look through the hole in the side there, we can line the barrel up so that the flats are aligned with the sides of the rifle. And get our grub screws done up nice and tightly. The brass part of the barrel should be flush with the block, so as you can see there, R1's flush, and we can get all the securing screws installed. If the barrel is pushed too far back, your magazine won't fit in the rifle, so just make sure that it's nice and flush there. If it's flush, you won't have an issue. And then finally reinstall our shroud. And there we have it, there's our reinforcing plate fitted. So with the reinforcing plate fitted, it's time to test it down Pete's airgun farm. So we're set up in the 50-yard range and we've got a target set out on the back wall. Our target is an A4 piece of paper with a number of targets printed onto it, the targets themselves being red dots in 25mm circles. The rifle is slightly modified, we are using a different barrel from standard, as the standard barrel was pretty useless if I'm honest. We still do have some issues with the rifle, but we are going to be sorting them out one by one, and I'm glad to say that the reinforcing plate has been successful. The top 2 rows of groups you're seeing appear now are 5-shot groups at 50 yards using the rifle without the reinforcing plate fitted. As we move from target to target, you can see a small variation in the point of impact, and whilst the groups aren't terrible, they aren't as tight as I would have liked, but they are a lot better than the standard barrel. Moving on to the middle 2 rows of groups, and these 2 rows were done using the reinforcing plate. And as you can see straight away, the groups have tightened up a little. We are still using the magazine at this point, and I do think we have a magazine issue with this rifle. Every now and again you get a pellet loaded into the breech that doesn't quite feel right. I believe the magazine is oversprung and it's damaging the pellets before they go into the barrel, but that's something we'll be looking at very shortly. But again, all these groups were done at 50 yards, and these middle 2 rows are done using our reinforcing plate. As we move from target to target, you can see the point of impact does still change very slightly, but it's a lot better than the standard. I will say that the extra weight from the reinforcing plate does make the rifle a lot nicer to shoot. There's more weight on the front, and it does do a good job at deadening the rifle down. There's no real recoil, and the rifle itself does feel very dead to shoot. Now obviously it is a sub-12 rifle and they don't have much recoil to begin with, but the difference between the reinforcing plate being fitted and it not being fitted was quite noticeable. The last row of groups, the one at the bottom there, is done using a single shot loader, or just loading the pellets straight into the barrel. As you can see, the point of impact has changed, it's moved up slightly, and as we go through you can see that the groups themselves are a little more uniform, with most of the pellets touching one another. And as we move on to the last 2 groups, I did try and readjust the scope, but I clicked it the wrong way, so the point of impact moved up instead of down. That was just my mistake. But you can see there that final group was rather nice. Right then, so that's how we got on down range. I'm happy to say that the steel reinforcing plate fitted to the front rail has been a success. It's made the rifle a little more accurate and a little nicer to shoot. There's no real downsides to having the plate fitted. It does make the rifle a little heavier, but as the rifle spends sort of 90% of its life on the bench, I really don't see that as a problem. So as we said, downrange, the top 2 rows of groups here were done using the rifle without the reinforcing plate fitted. The next 2, these ones here, were done using the reinforcing plate. Then the bottom ones were done using the reinforcing plate and single shot loading the rifle. If we take a look with a 5p piece, a 5p piece for anyone outside the UK is 18mm in diameter. We can cover most, if not all, the groups entirely with the 5p piece. You still do get 1 or 2 flyers, but I think that's more of a magazine issue rather than an actual rifle issue. If we take a look at the magazine, it's quite oversprung in my opinion, as when the final pellet at the end there does get crushed by the spring, so we are going to be taking the magazine apart and adjusting the spring tension. It's a fairly easy job, but I'll make a separate video on that. But for now guys, that's pretty much going to do it for this video, so thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one.